Okay, a few of my subs had suggested to me that I try out this demo for the game called Dispatch, and I ended up trying it out. And then a few other subs asked if I would give my impressions of the game, which I'm doing right now, basically. So, to tell you my experience with these sorts of games, I gotta be honest, it's pretty minimal. My experience, for example, with Telltale games, i.e. The Wolf Among Us, goes back to the golden era of YouTube, if you wish to call it such, when people would sort of upload their Let's Plays. So, 11, 12, 10 years ago, this sort of thing. And yeah, I watched a whole bunch of The Wolf Among Us, so I'm actually familiar with Telltale games. Now, this new studio, Ad Hoc Studio, is apparently a derivative of Telltale games that was disbanded, obviously. And this game, Dispatch, is very much in the spirit of that sort of game that they made back in the day, which is a kind of narrative adventure with branching dialogue, with heavy emphasis on the story. But as such, I've never played this type of game before. That said, I am, after the experiment, if you will, with the demo, interested in this game, and I probably will end up buying it and trying it out. However, my impressions. The very, very first thing that stuck out at me, and I'm not exaggerating, it's going to sound really weird, maybe to some people, was the fact that a major character, as it turns out your love interest in the story, was an attractive, blonde, blue-eyed woman. But the fact that the story even had an attractive blonde woman shocked me. It absolutely floored me. And then I saw the other women characters in the game, and they all looked pretty attractive. And I started to question my sanity. After all, we're living in the current year, 2025. As in the current year, you're not allowed to have attractive women in games anymore. So this was the very first thing that occurred to me. I couldn't believe that a major character, and especially your love interest, was this attractive blonde woman. I just was absolutely stun-locked by this. So that was the first thing I noticed. Sounds weird, but these days I'm used to women in games either being incredibly unappealing to look at or looking like men. So this was something that I thought was pretty outstanding. So it goes without saying that basically all the characters, obviously the males too, look pretty good. They're well designed, they have appeal, so no complaints there, and I think aesthetics are important in the game. I think, to be perfectly honest, if this game had turned out to have very ugly, unattractive characters, especially women, I would be less inclined to even want to try the game out in the first place. That aside, yeah, the characters look good, no complaints there. I wish this were just standard, but it happens not to be, so I guess props to Ad Hoc Studios for this. And now we come to the writing. And the writing has me a little bit concerned, if I'm perfectly honest. And I'll tell you why. I do detect a whiff, not too much, but maybe even a few whiffs, of the so-called dreaded millennial writing. It's a writing style which many of you might be familiar with, but basically millennial writing is low-quality writing with really bad puns and jokes and this sort of thing. And the game seems to have some of that. Now, it might be the case these days that millennial writing is just unavoidable. It's just a feature in games because most of the people doing the writing are millennial. I don't know. I'm not millennial myself. But I did detect more than just a whiff. There's some of that going on, and it has me a little bit concerned. On the other hand, the writing was not terrible. I found the writing serviceable, to put it as accurately as possible. This game appears to have, thus far, based on the demo, only based on the demo, serviceable writing. It could be worse, it could be better. We've only seen a tiny, tiny sliver, a snippet, of the entirety of the game. But hey, as long as the writing is serviceable, I can deal with that. The premise of the story seems pretty interesting, and it's a classic in some sense. We all know, we who know comic books at least, of heroes who don't have superpowers, right? Their superpower is their mind, their intellect, their gadgets, their physical prowess that they've built up with human acumen and human endurance and human grit. Well, in this case, this guy used to have a mecha suit, so he's a bit like Iron Man, but the mecha suit was destroyed. And he doesn't have any superpowers apart from that. He probably was pretty smart, I guess. And the whole story revolves around him trying to come to terms with that, seemingly, and dealing with actual superheroes with actual superpowers. Now, I think it's pretty cool that the attractive blonde woman is a superpowered woman who apparently can fly and is super strong. I'm not entirely sure, but her name is Blonde Blazer. And she's the one that ultimately recruits you to this agency that dispatches superheroes to help in the local neighborhood and this sort of thing. And I think the premise is interesting. The superhero who lost his superpowers because he didn't have any superpowers in the first place. He just had a mecha suit. So basically, he's just a dude now. He's just a normal guy. Or, as the Green Lantern once said to Batman in a particular animated film I watched, wait, you're just a guy in a bat suit running around? Something like that. Only in this case, he doesn't even have a bat suit. He just has mecha. His mecha is destroyed. The agency is promising him to restore his mecha, to build it again, if he only does this dispatch work. And therein lies the rub and the plot. Seemingly a lot of friction between the criminal superheroes. That's another interesting feature, because the superheroes working on the dispatch are in fact criminals with criminal records. And it seems like an interesting hodgepodge of different personalities. And you even have a couple of very well-known and large YouTubers such as Moist Critical who assume certain roles in the game. For example, Moist Critical voice acts this guy Sonar, who's basically a giant werebat. So yeah, it seems pretty okay so far. The plot seems okay. The characters look pretty good. The premise is okay. The writing is serviceable. Has me worried in some respects, but not entirely. And as for the gameplay, this idea that you have to basically work as a dispatcher and then correctly choose which heroes do which activity and whether they're the appropriate hero, and you can really screw that up. I think it's an interesting idea. I generally like it, but I wish you had the option to pause it. I'm not a fan of everything going by so quickly. It's a story game after all. It's a storytelling game, better put. So I would ultimately prefer it if you had the option to slow things down and basically pause it. But I've been told that that's probably not going to happen, so you have to take what you can get. I accept that as such. There was one little thing involving transistors or some kind of hacking that I totally borked. I couldn't do it. Maybe I'm just too stupid. Probably am too stupid, but I couldn't figure that out. But overall, my impression of the game is fairly positive. By no means was I blown away by it, but I am interested in this game as of now, and I will probably end up buying the game and playing it, if only because I'm curious to see how the story goes down and what the resolution to the story is of this character who lost his mecha. And who knows, it might turn out to be a lot better than I think it is. We just don't know. That said, I think it's always a plus point when you have attractive characters in a game, especially attractive women. It just doesn't happen anymore in the current year. So props to Ad Hoc Studio for not making all the women ugly. I think that's a fantastic thing. And I can promise you that your decision to have attractive characters in the game will motivate a lot of people to buy the game and want to play the game. So props to you for that again. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. And if you like my content and you like my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's much appreciated, as it really helps out the channel. And I'll check you out next time. Take care.